Most modern readers approach Hebrews with one assumption already fixed in their minds: that the first and the second automatically mean Old Covenant versus New Covenant. But when we actually examine the Greek text carefully, the argument becomes much more complicated, especially once chapter 9 continues directly into temple language. One of the biggest problems in modern Bible reading is that translators sometimes insert explanatory words into the text. Those insertions may reflect theology rather than explicit wording. And in Hebrews 8, the phrases, the first and the second, are often mentally connected to covenant, even where the noun itself is not repeated. The Greek text says, by saying new, he has made the first old, but the word covenant is not repeated in that sentence. Translators infer it from the earlier quotation of Jeremiah. The question is, does the surrounding context support only covenant language, or something larger involving temple administration itself? The answer becomes important because chapter 9 immediately continues discussing sanctuary structure, not abstract theology, not replacement language, but physical temple imagery, lampstands, veils, priests, holy places, and sacrificial service. That continuity matters enormously. Hebrews 9 specifically says, the first tabernacle. Now the context becomes unmistakably temple-oriented. The author immediately begins describing furniture, rituals, priestly access, and sanctuary divisions. This is no longer merely conceptual covenant discussion. The text continues describing the menorah, the table of bread, the holy place, the veil, the ark, and priestly service. This is detailed Brit-Ha-Chadasha language. The argument is saturated with sanctuary imagery from beginning to end. Hebrews repeatedly contrasts earthly copies and heavenly realities. This pattern comes directly from Torah itself. Moses was commanded to construct the tabernacle according to a heavenly pattern shown on the mountain. That framework already existed long before Hebrews. The central shift in Hebrews is priesthood, not ethnic replacement, not abolition of Israel, not cancellation of God's promises. The discussion revolves around Messiah functioning as heavenly high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. Replacement theology often reads Hebrews as, God ended Israel, abolished Torah, and replaced the covenant completely. But those conclusions are often imported into the text rather than directly stated by the author himself. The actual focus remains overwhelmingly priestly and sanctuary-centered. Yes, Hebrews quotes Jeremiah's prophecy about a new covenant. But Jeremiah itself says this covenant is made with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not with a replacement nation, not with the destruction of Israel's identity. Hebrews says, what is becoming old and aging is near vanishing away. But what exactly was vanishing? The surrounding chapters repeatedly discuss the earthly sanctuary system, Levitical administration, and temple access. Historically, the Beit-Ha-Mikdash itself disappeared in 70 AD. If the author intended total covenant replacement, chapter 9 immediately becomes strange, because instead of explaining ethnic replacement, he continues expanding sanctuary operations in detail. The literary flow never leaves temple territory. That continuity is critical to understanding Hebrews correctly. Hebrews sounds deeply connected to Second Temple Jewish thought, especially themes involving heavenly sanctuaries, priestly mediation, and heavenly temple patterns. Some scholars have even noticed conceptual parallels with Qumran's Second Temple Jewish literature. The earliest followers of Yeshua did not behave as though Torah had vanished. They continued temple attendance, festival observance, and Jewish communal worship. This historical reality is often ignored in later theological systems. In Acts 21, Paul participates in temple purification rites connected to Nazirite obligations. The Jerusalem elders specifically instruct him to demonstrate publicly that he still walks orderly according to Torah. And Paul complies. Number 6 included sacrificial offerings connected to Nazirite completion. Yet Acts never presents Paul as rejecting Messiah by participating in temple procedures. That creates a major problem for the claim that sacrifices had already been entirely abolished. Hebrews absolutely teaches the supremacy of Messiah's priesthood and sacrifice. But supremacy is not identical to abolition language. The text focuses on heavenly mediation, perfect access, and eternal priesthood. Those are related ideas, but they are not automatically the same argument. The Torah itself restricts sacrificial service to the place chosen by God. Without a standing temple, the sacrificial system cannot function according to Torah requirements. That historical reality matters. Historically, sacrifices stopped because the temple was destroyed, not because the apostles announced the Torah no longer exists. The disappearance of sacrificial service followed the destruction of the sanctuary itself. Hebrews presents Yeshua ministering in a heavenly sanctuary. This is why the earthly temple is described as a shadow or copy. The argument is architectural and priestly, earthly reflection versus heavenly reality. Once chapter 9 begins describing the first tabernacle, the second veil, and priestly movement, the repeated language of first and second becomes deeply connected to sanctuary structure itself. Modern readers often inherit theological assumptions directly from translation tradition, but the Greek text sometimes leaves the referent broader than English renderings imply. That is why contextual reading becomes so important. Did God replace Israel? Hebrews never explicitly says God rejected Israel. It never says the promises to Abraham were canceled. And it never says the house of Judah disappeared from God's covenant purposes. Those conclusions are often imported later. The strongest reading of Hebrews may be a transition of priestly administration. Levitical earthly service contrasted with Messiah's heavenly Melchizedek ministry. That is not identical to ethnic replacement theology. Chapter after chapter, altar language, blood language, veil language, sanctuary language, priesthood language, and heavenly temple imagery dominate the discussion. The context never drifts far from Brit-Ha-Chadasha theology. Hebrews argues that the earthly sanctuary was temporary and symbolic. But temporary does not automatically mean evil, and symbolic does not automatically mean abolished covenant identity. Those are separate conclusions. Many debates about Hebrews begin with later theological systems already assumed beforehand. Then the text gets forced into those systems. But careful contextual reading often reveals a far more Jewish and temple-centered framework. Because once the temple context becomes visible, many traditional assumptions suddenly become less certain. The discussion shifts from God replaced Israel to how does Messiah function as heavenly high priest? That changes everything. The book of Hebrews deserves contextual reading, not inherited assumptions, especially when translation insertions and theological tradition can shape interpretation before the reader even opens the text. The Greek wording matters. Hebrews presents a heavenly sanctuary, a heavenly high priest, and a superior priestly mediation through Yeshua. But the text itself never plainly states God replaced Israel or abolished his covenant promises. Those conclusions must be examined carefully against the actual context.